The first time I saw her, I was captivated. Deborah Oladapo was the kind of woman that commanded respect, graceful, wise, and deeply spiritual. As the wife of Pastor Matthew Oladapo, she was revered in Bethel Assembly Church, a pillar of faith and virtue. The first time I saw her, I knew I was in trouble. She wasn't just beautiful. She had an aura about her, graceful, elegant, and deeply spiritual. Deborah, the wife of the pastor, was the epitome of what a virtuous woman should be. She was always in church, leading the women's fellowship, organizing prayer meetings, and serving as a mother figure to many. But I saw something others didn't. A sadness behind her smile, a longing behind her praise. I was just a new convert then, struggling with my faith. The church had been my refuge after a heartbreak, and Pastor Deborah had been my guiding light. I never meant to fall for her, but the heart is a dangerous thing. One evening after a powerful midweek service, she approached me. "Brother Tunda, I see the hunger for God in you," she said with a warm smile. "Would you like to join the Bible study team?" I should have declined. I should have recognized that spending more time around her was a trap for my soul. But instead, I said yes. Started as innocent Bible study meetings turned into long discussions about life, faith, and struggles. She shared stories of her younger years before she became a pastor's wife, of dreams she had abandoned, of sacrifices she had made. Being a pastor's wife is a calling, but it is also a burden. She once whispered during a late-night church meeting. I saw something that night, a crack in her perfect image. Then came the first touch, a fleeting moment, a brush of fingers across the table, a lingering gaze. It wasn't long before the stolen moments grew longer, the silences heavier, the looks more dangerous. One evening, after a long Bible study session, the church was empty except for the two of us. Rain pattered against the windows, and the dim candlelight flickered in the church office. "Deborah," I said, her name slipping off my tongue too easily. She looked up at me, something unreadable in her eyes. "Tunde, we have to stop this," she whispered. But she didn't move. I should have walked away. I should have ended it there. But instead, I reached out. And in that moment, I saw it. The desire in her eyes. The same fire burning in me. And then, the door creaked open. Pastor Matthew stood there watching us. His face was unreadable, his eyes piercing. And in that instant, I knew we had been caught. Pastor Matthew stood at the doorway. The room fell into silence. I immediately pulled my hand away, stepping back as if I had been burned. Deborah gasped, her eyes darting between her husband and me. "Leave," Pastor Matthew said, his voice eerily calm. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, but there was nothing to say. I had betrayed my own conscience. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited for the call, for the judgment, for the punishment, but it never came. Days passed. I avoided the church. Then, on Sunday morning, my phone rang. "Tunde," the voice on the other end said. It was Pastor Matthew. "Come to my office." My hands shook as I walked into the same room where I had almost ruined everything. Pastor Matthew sat behind his wooden desk, his Bible open. He looked at me, not with anger, but with disappointment. "You are young, full of passion, but passion without discipline is a fire that destroys," he said. I lowered my head in shame. "Do you love God, Tunde?" he asked. "Yes, Pastor," I whispered. Then walk away, before you ruin yourself, before you ruin her. The weight of his words crushed me. And so, I left. That night, Deborah sat by the window lost in thought, while Tunde walked out of the pastor's office. He walked past her and out of the house into the streets. Deborah just sat there watching him without a word. The house was silent that evening, but it wasn't the comforting kind of silence. It was the kind that carried the weight of unsaid words, unspoken accusations, and an impending storm. Deborah sat at the dining table, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her teacup. She hadn't been able to eat all day. The tension in her chest had grown unbearable since the moment Pastor Matthew caught her and Tunde in the church office. She had known this moment was coming. When she finally heard his footsteps approaching, she exhaled shakily. Pastor Matthew entered the room, dressed in his usual flowing robe. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He simply walked to the chair across from her and sat down. A long, heavy silence passed between them. Then he spoke. "How long, Deborah?" His voice was eerily calm, but Deborah knew this was not the calm of a man at peace. It was the calm before destruction. She swallowed hard. "Matthew, please." "How long?" he repeated, his voice firmer this time. Deborah's lips trembled. There was no use lying. He had seen it with his own eyes. It never got that far, she whispered, ashamed to even look at him. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. "It never got that far?" He shook his head. "I stood there, Deborah. I stood there and watched you allow another man into the space that should belong to me." Tears filled Deborah's eyes. "Matthew, I never meant for this to happen, but it did." His voice was steel now, his hands clasped tightly on the table as though holding himself back from an outburst. "I have given my life to this church," he continued. "I have given my life to God, to this family, to you, and yet my own wife." He stopped, his throat tightening with raw emotion. Deborah let out a sob. "I was lonely, Matthew." His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Lonely." "Yes." She wiped her tears. "You were always at the church, always preaching, always leading others, but I felt like I had lost my husband to the ministry. So your solution was to turn to another man?" "No." She shook her head desperately. "I never planned this. I never wanted this. But Tunde, he listened. He saw me." "So, because he saw you, you let him touch you?" Deborah looked away in shame. A long silence filled the room again before Pastor Matthew spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Do you love him?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. "No." "Then why did you let it happen?" She pressed her palms against her face, shaking with sobs. She had no answer. "I have spent years preaching forgiveness," he said. "I have counseled broken marriages, led sinners back to God. And now, my own wife." He let out a humorless chuckle. "It seems even pastors are tested in ways they never expect." Deborah lifted her tear-streaked face. "Matthew, please don't leave me." His eyes burned into hers. "You already left me, Deborah." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her to drown in the silence she had created. Sunday service had barely ended before the whispers began. It started in hushed tones among the women's fellowship, then spread like wildfire through the congregation. Bethel Assembly Church had never been a place of scandal. Until now. "Did you hear what happened?" pastor's wife and brother Tunde. Can you imagine? I knew something was off about that boy. The shame this has brought upon our pastor. God forbid. The news had made its way through the pews, into the parking lot, and even reached the nearby market stalls. By the time Tunde arrived at church that morning, he could feel the eyes on him. Sharp, judgmental, cutting through his skin like daggers. Tunde sat in his usual spot at the back of the church, but nothing felt the same. The once welcoming congregation now greeted him with side eyes and whispers. Women clutched their hymn books closer, and the men barely acknowledged him. He tried to focus on the sermon, but it was impossible. "Brother Tunde," an usher called after service. He turned, relieved that someone had finally spoken to him without malice. "Pastor Matthew says he would like to see you in his office." His heart sank. He had avoided Pastor Matthew since the incident, too ashamed to face him. He already knew what was coming. Pastor Matthew sat behind his desk. He didn't look angry. That was worse. "Tunde, I have always believed in second chances," the pastor began. "But this has gone beyond just you and Deborah. The church is talking, the congregation is divided, and most importantly, your presence here, it is doing you no good." Tunde swallowed hard, his fingers clenching into fists. "Are you telling me to leave, sir?" The pastor exhaled deeply. "I am telling you that sometimes the best way to heal is to walk away. You can't fight rumors. You can't change how people see you. You can only change where you go from here." Tunde stared at the wooden desk, at the open Bible that once brought him peace. But there was no peace left here for him. The next morning, he packed his bags. The town he once called home now felt small, suffocating. He couldn't bear another Sunday of whispers, of judgment, of seeing Deborah from a distance and knowing he had ruined her life as much as his own. As he walked down the dusty village road, a few familiar faces watched from their doorsteps. "It's best he leaves," someone muttered. "Good riddance," another scoffed. Tunde gritted his teeth and kept walking. When he reached the outskirts of town, he turned back one last time. The church bell rang in the distance. The same church where he had found faith, purpose, and forbidden love. With a deep sigh, he faced forward and walked away. This time, for good. Deborah stood at the front of the church, her heart pounding violently in her chest. She had spent the last few weeks dreading this moment, but she knew she couldn't run from it forever. The whispers, the judgmental stares, the sideways glances from women she once prayed with, it had all become unbearable. She had disgraced herself. She had disgraced her husband. She had disgraced the church. But most of all, she had betrayed God. Now she was here to face the congregation. The church was silent as Pastor Matthew walked to the pulpit. His presence commanded attention, but today, all eyes were on Deborah. "Our God is a God of mercy," Pastor Matthew began, his voice calm yet strong. "But mercy is for those who seek it. My wife, Sister Deborah, has something to say." Deborah took a deep breath and stepped forward. "My brothers and sisters in Christ," she began, her voice shaking. "I come before you today as a broken woman. A woman who lost her way, a woman who fell into temptation and sinned, not just against my husband, but against God, against this church, and against myself." Murmurs rippled through the pews. Some people averted their gazes, others whispered amongst themselves. Deborah swallowed back the shame burning in her throat. "I do not stand here today expecting your forgiveness," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "I stand here because I need to own my mistakes. I let my emotions control me. I let the enemy into my heart, and I fell." She turned to look at Pastor Matthew, whose eyes remained on her, unreadable yet unshaken. "But I am not that woman anymore," she declared. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then one of the elder mothers of the church, Mama Lara, slowly stood up. "May the Lord be with you, my daughter," she said in a low, measured voice. Another woman followed. "The Lord is merciful," she whispered. Soon, more voices joined in. Some nodded, some sighed, some remained skeptical. But Deborah had done what she came to do. She had faced her greatest fear. She had humbled herself. She had laid her sins bare before God and man, and she felt lighter. That night, Deborah sat on the bed, her hands shaking. She had done what was right. She had confessed. She had asked for forgiveness. But what about her husband? Would he ever look at her the same way? The door creaked open, and Pastor Matthew stepped inside. He looked at her for a long moment before finally sitting on the edge of the bed. "You were brave today," he said softly. Deborah swallowed hard. "Does that mean you forgive me?" Pastor Matthew exhaled deeply. "Deborah, forgiveness is not easy. You hurt me. You hurt this marriage. But I have spent my life preaching about grace. How can I stand in the pulpit and preach about a forgiving God if I cannot forgive my own wife?" A sob escaped Deborah's lips. He reached for her hands, squeezing them gently. "We will be okay. It won't happen overnight, but we will find our way back to each other." Tears flowed freely now as she fell into his arms, her body shaking with relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt loved again. For the first time since the scandal, she knew she still had a home. Months passed, and slowly, the wounds began to heal. The whispers in the church died down, and the judgmental stare softened. Time, prayer, and faith had worked their magic, binding together what had been broken. Pastor Matthew and Deborah found a new rhythm, one built not just on duty and faith, but on understanding, love, and intentional care. They prayed together not just as leaders, but as husband and wife. They spent time together not just as church figures, but as partners in love. The past remained a scar, but no longer an open wound. One Sunday morning, as they stood at the altar, side by side, hand in hand, the congregation erupted into joyful cheers. "God restores," Pastor Matthew said, looking at his wife with a smile that was full of forgiveness and love. And as Deborah gazed back at him, tears in her eyes but peace in her heart, she knew that she was home. Some love stories are not perfect. Some love stories go through storms. But the strongest love stories are the ones that survive them. I hope you have learned a lesson or two from this wonderful story. Thank you so much for watching. Continue to like and share our videos, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.